Hey friends, this is Alex Fenske, the team leader at Keller Williams Elite, and wanted to address something that has been coming up a lot. And the topic is buyer agent cooperating commissions. I've been hearing a lot of agents say that they're seeing more commissions that are below the amounts that they typically see. I don't know if that's a measurable real thing. I don't have data on that. And yet it's a great opportunity for us to talk about how you can protect your commission as a buyer agent, regardless of what a listing may be paying out. Now, before we go any further, I just want to set the record straight. We're not going to be violating any antitrust laws here in this conversation because we're not going to be discussing any numbers as it relates to commissions. I'll just use some placeholders so that we can talk about this. And it doesn't matter what brokerage you're with. We're not talking about the amounts that we're charging our clients. We're just going to talk about the process of how to ensure that you receive the commission that you desire for yourself. So that's what we're going to do. Number one, if this is happening, if it's true that buyer agent commissions are being seen lower than whatever you would consider normal, I think it may have something to do with the fact that we are in a fairly extreme seller's market, and what's being paid out is relative to what the total commission is in some way. And you have to imagine that in a market with record low housing inventory, and at least last month, new listings down 22% over the same month prior year. So with new listings being fairly scarce, you could imagine that as a business decision, it's possible that more agents are willing to accept a lower commission rate than they would have been if listings were plentiful. So if that is happening, that's probably the reason why. There also have been some lawsuits that I think as of yet haven't gone anywhere to institute any kind of a change, but there's actions now to start displaying to consumers the amount of the cooperating commission, which actually will help with this conversation. There's also been actions to try to get it to where the buyer agent commission is paid exclusively by the buyer, and the seller only pays the sellers. So I think the skills that we're going to talk about here are really relevant going forward, regardless of what may be happening in the market at the moment. These are just good business practices as a professional. So speaking of best practices, one best practice of top producing agents is that you complete a buyer consultation prior to beginning work with any buyer. I know it's not the norm in the industry, and yet it is the norm for top producing agents for lots of different reasons. When you get a buyer, before you go and start showing homes, you're going to sit down in an office, ideally, or now these days over video, but you're going to sit down and have a purposeful conversation with the buyer. The way that I see it and what I see done at a high level here is that you're going to cover three different things in that conversation. One, you're going to do some education. You're going to educate the buyer on the market conditions and the process that they're about to go through. That alone is more than most agents have done for them. And so they're probably going to really want to work with you after you do that. So part one is the market and process education. Part two, for me right here, this is where I talk about the agency agreement. I've given you some value. We've talked. I've taught you some things. We've talked about how the process is going to go. Would you like to work together? And then we go into the agency agreement and complete that. And then number three, I'm going to go into the needs analysis, going really deep, way more than bedrooms, bathrooms, area, and price. I mean, I've got 3-4 pages of questions for us to hash out all the considerations about what you're going to want and not want when it comes to your next home. Now, the reason I put the needs analysis after the agency agreement, if I do a really thorough needs analysis, that might take me 40 or 45 minutes, just that one part. Now, overall, it saves a lot of time in the long run when your buyer really fully understands what they're looking for and you understand it too. So it's worth the time. However, if we're going to come upon an issue where they have a problem with the way that we're going to work together in terms of agency, I'd rather find that out before I spend the extra 45 minutes in a needs analysis. So that's the reason that I put the agency agreement, the commitment, in the middle. You can put it wherever you want. It is a best practice to have a meeting like this before you get out there and start running around with a buyer. Inside of that, inside of those three parts, one of them I mentioned is the agency agreement. And the agency agreement that's published by, I'm a member of the Main Street Organization of Realtors or more, and so I use the Main Street Organization of Realtors Exclusive Buyer Representation Agreement. There also is a version of this form that is a non-exclusive, which means they buy a property through you that you brought to them, but they are free to work with other agents on properties that those agents bring to them. That's the non-exclusive, which typically works better for like investors and stuff like that. We're for the exclusive. That's what we're going to focus on right now. On the Main Street Exclusive Buyer Representation Agreement, there's two paragraphs in particular that relate to protecting your commission. Those are paragraphs 9 and 10, which are on page 3. Looks like this. All right. That's page 3 of that document. Now, paragraph 9 is the retainer fee, and paragraph 10 is the overall brokerage commission or the compensation paragraph. So here's what paragraph 9 says. Retainer fee. Buyer agrees to pay brokerage a non-refundable retainer fee of blank dollars due and payable upon signing of this agreement. Said retainer fee either shall or shall not be applied towards any brokerage fee owed by buyer to brokerage. And that brokerage fee is what's discussed in the next paragraph. So what we're saying here is you can actually charge an upfront retainer fee to a buyer upon them agreeing to work with you. I'm going to give you scripts for how to describe this stuff in a way that's not off-putting to a client. And remember also that you're not just walking up to somebody and throwing a brokerage agreement at them and asking them to pay you money. You're doing this in the context of a value add conversation where you've just taught them about the market. You're going to be doing a thorough needs analysis. And this is just 2 paragraphs as you walk them through the terms of the buyer agency agreement. So with this retainer fee, you can either make it applicable towards the total brokerage fee or not. That's your choice. And you get to decide the amount. Here's one thing I'll tell you. These days, you hear a lot of agents that are frustrated by buyers who aren't willing to do what it takes to win a home in a market like this, because there's so many offers and you have to really offer really strong terms and strong prices. And not every buyer is in a position where they feel comfortable doing that. And a lot of it comes down to their level of motivation and urgency and whether they want to buy a home or they really need to buy a home. One great way to make sure you're only working with the most qualified and most motivated buyers is to get a retainer fee. And you could see it if you're applying it towards the total brokerage fee. It's just an advance on the commission. That's all it is. It's an advance. And again, I'm going to give you scripts to tee that up in a way that's very palatable for clients. So that's number 1 is the retainer fee. Paragraph 10 here, this is the second portion of it. This is the compensation paragraph. It's a bit longer. I'm going to read through it, and then we're going to go back and talk about it, and I'll give you a couple of scripts to use. So 10, compensation. If during the term of this contract or the protection period, buyer enters into a contract to acquire real estate, and such contract results in a closed transaction, buyer agrees to pay brokerage a fee of blank % of the purchase price, brokerage fee, at the time of the closing of the property. If the compensation being offered by the seller or seller's brokerage, including any bonus, is less than the brokerage fee, designated agent will inform buyer prior to showing the property. Any compensation collected from the seller or seller's brokerage will be applied to the brokerage fee, with any remainder owed by the buyer to be paid by the buyer or brokerage upon closing of the property. The designated managing broker will make every effort to collect the compensation of the brokerage fee from the seller or seller's brokerage. If the amount being offered by the seller or seller's brokerage, including any bonus, exceeds brokerage fee, designated agent shall disclose this to buyer. Any amount being offered by seller or seller's brokerage exceeding brokerage fee up to blank % of the purchase price may be retained by brokerage. Okay, let's break that down a bit. So number 1, this says that when they write a contract on a property during this agreement or the protection period that follows, and it closes, they owe you a brokerage fee of a certain % of the price. The next portion says that if the cooperating compensation from the listing office is less than the % you wrote down, the buyer owes you the difference. Okay? Then it goes on to say that you're going to make every effort to collect the cooperating commission, meaning you're not going to go and tell the listing office, hey, don't pay me the cooperative commission. My buyer's got me. No, you're going to make every effort to collect that cooperating commission and apply it towards the brokerage fee owed by your buyer. And then lastly, it talks about if the amount is actually above it. So if the amount of the brokerage fee you wrote in the blank, whatever percent that is, if the listing they buy is paying out more than that, you then fill in the second blank that says whether or not that's going to be retained by the brokerage. That's your second blank there, is you can write in a higher percent and say, hey, our minimum fee we're working for is this. We can retain up to this percent. And so you spell that out all in advance. So hopefully that all makes sense in terms of how that works. Let's go back now and talk about how you would describe this to a client. The retainer fee, I would just say, okay, so here in paragraph 9, because remember, we're going through this with them, and we've just described paragraph 8. We're having them read it. In paragraph 9, you can allow them to read that, or you can read it to them. Either way, it's important that they read the text. And you say, surely you understand that professionals don't work for free. I am always going to make sure that I give you the most of my efforts. I know there are a lot of agents out there they may not use this retainer fee. And what I hear is the feedback from their clients is that if the agent wasn't sure whether that buyer was going to close on a property, they felt like they were treated differently. They felt like maybe they didn't have the agent's full attention because that agent is trying to figure out on their own who's worth my time to help or not. And I never want you to feel that way. I want you to know that I am going to give you my highest level of service. And what that means for me is that this portion of the brokerage fee, I know I'm going to be compensated for the time I'm going to spend consulting with you, showing you homes, discussing offers, frankly, even if nothing ever ends up closing. And you do want the highest level of service, don't you? So that's what the brokerage or the retainer fee is about. And that fee is actually going to be applied towards the total brokerage fee. That's what's spelled out in the next paragraph here. Paragraph 10 is compensation. And again, you're going to have them read this, or you're going to read that to them. Either way, they read the text and you're going to say something along these lines. So my fee that I work for is blank percent. And most of the time, that's actually going to be covered in whole or almost in whole by the sharing of commissions that's coming from the listing office on whatever listing you choose to buy. So if there's any discrepancy there, if they're sharing a cooperating commission that's lower than what my fee is, you'll be responsible for that difference. What I find is that in most cases, the cooperating fee covers all or almost all of it. So most of my clients end up owing me little or nothing. So as a buyer, it's kind of cool the way this works is that you're going to get all of my service. Somebody else is going to pay for all or almost all of it. So I'll let you know before we go and see any home. I'll tell you what the case is, if they're covering my whole fee, or if they're not, how much that difference would be. I'll let you know about that before we go and see any home. That way there's never any surprises. Does that sound good? Yeah, it sounds good. Okay, so that's it. I would then go on, with the rest of the brokerage agreement. I think it's important to note that people want to work with a professional. Serious buyers want to work with a professional. And nobody with reasonable expectations expects a professional to work for free. So I think it's very fair of you to want to protect or ensure that the amount of your fee is going to be a certain amount. And I think it's also fair if, based on your business practices, you think that it's worth it and it's a fair deal for you to get a little advance on that fee in the event that something doesn't close. And I think when you describe it confidently, number one, when you decide on what your numbers are in advance, you may need to consult with your brokerage if they have any policies around this in terms of what the amount needs to be. But when you decide this amount in advance and you discuss this confidently, I think your clients are going to have no problem with it. Customer service is predominantly about setting and upholding expectations. People, if you tell people, here's what's going to happen, and then that's what happens, that's a good customer experience. if you don't tell them something's going to happen and it does, whether it was your responsibility or not, they're usually going to think it's your fault. That's a bad customer experience when there are surprises. And everyone likes being surprised, both for the most part for like their birthday or something, but not with fees. Nobody likes surprise fees. So I would say the best thing you can do is, number one, conduct a buyer consultation before you begin working with any buyer. For this reason and so many others, it's so important. Number two, don't just gloss over or line out these numbers if it's important to you to ensure that you're going to get a specific amount for your fee. And then number three, decide these amounts in advance and practice what you're going to say. Practice it on your own. Practice it with another agent in your office so that you can say it confidently and not create an energy funk around a money conversation. Because when you do that, that's when people get weird. Is they're like, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. You don't want it to get weird around a money conversation. So you just practice what you're going to say. Consult with your brokerage or your company to the extent that you need to in terms of how to do this. And that's within policy for your company. But I think you should feel confident as a professional that you do deserve a fee, and I think you should be able to confidently go out and address that with your clients. And if they're not willing to do that, they might just not be the client for you. And you know what? That's okay. Not everyone has to be your client. You want to work with people who want to work with you. And I think this is one great way to do it. So I wish you the best with this, and good luck protecting your commissions.